Well, shall we start? I want to welcome you all back in this. The Samaritan woman stayed for the week or two. She's patient there, back there. I want to welcome you in this sort of nasty day. I appreciate you coming. It is nasty. And all my friends watching, thank you so much for faithfulness. This lecture series is a gift more to me than to anybody. Okay, here's my trusty assistant, Gianna White. And Jeff deserves a great deal of credit for all he does on these. Today is the Feast of the Annunciation. And when I was thinking about coming here this morning, I thought, how strange. We are celebrating the Annunciation, followed by 9 months in the birth, and within 3 weeks, we're celebrating the death. That's a short lifespan, isn't it? And then I thought of an interesting fact. Some of you may be familiar with the book Dangerous Memories by Elizabeth Johnson, a sister of St. Joseph from the East New England somewhere. And she writes that in both the Old Testament, the Hebrew Scriptures, and the New Testament, there are numerous, over 50, examples of God asking somebody to do something. Liz Wolford, I want you to be a judge. And you respond, I'm not sure I'm ready. You didn't respond, but let's pretend, I'm not sure I'm ready. You'll be fine. How do I know I'll be fine? God will be with you. And Liz goes on to be a judge. All of these cases in both the Old and the New Testament follow the same steps. Announcement, oh, I can't believe it. Don't worry, God will be with you, ba-boom. There is only one example in all of the scriptures where the person approached said, okay. And it was Mary. The only one in all the scriptures, after getting a dramatic announcement, well, how do I know this will happen? I'm not married. Don't worry. Ba-boom, boom, boom. And then she says, all right, be it done to me. I'll do it. That is an amazing characteristic of the woman. I'll do it. Now, today, is there any question you have about my bookend theories or any of the things we've done so far? Can we go ahead? You're all set? Good. Today we see John's signs progressing. That's why we call parts of John's gospel the book of signs. Remember the first one, Cana, a big Jewish event. Jesus and all his friends, a Jewish couple, a Jewish ceremony, Mary there, Jewish menu. The first sign is the importance of the Jewish context. Faithfulness to Jewish law and customs. And then John begins to move us and his community along a little road. The next sign, in the dead of night, a Pharisee named Nicodemus comes to see him. There's a little break in the wall. Here's a Jewish leader who's intrigued by him. The next sign comes with the discussion we had a couple of weeks ago. Now there's a newer break in the wall when the Samaritan woman and Jesus engage in a dialogue. And now we have not only a little break, but in the midst of that break, an openness to a culture that has similar roots, but an openness. Last week, we had the man born blind. That was our gospel. And that is also a sign because as you listen to the gospel, you heard there was dissension. The guy gets healed by Jesus. The religious leaders go crazy. So they call in his parents to say, "Is this your son?" And they say, "Yeah, it is." "Did this man heal him?" Then they say, "He's grown up, you ask him." Now, some parents would say, "Oh my God, he's been healed, it's wonderful." But his parents said, "He's old enough to speak for himself." Why did they do that? Because at that moment in time, people who were beginning to follow Jesus were being expelled from the synagogue. And they didn't want to be expelled. So they're caught between a rock and a hard place. So you see how this is growing. And eventually, some of the synagogues make the decision to expel people who were following Jesus. So a break really happened. And by the time John writes his gospel, the break has pretty well happened. Well, today, scholars feel that John is opening a final barrier. A final barrier that death is not the end. Scholars call this the culmination of the book of signs because it is a dramatic story, the rising of Lazarus. So does anybody have a question about those signs? Does that make sense? Good. So what I'd like to do this morning is what I did a couple of weeks ago, because the gospel's long. I'm going to take the gospel and read parts and take some of the context and culture, and we'll talk about it along the way. And then we'll talk about the other bookend. So this is John 11, verses 1 to 45. It's long, but it won't seem long by the time we're done. I hope. Now, a certain man was ill, Lazarus of Bethany, the village of Mary and her sister Martha. Mary was the one who anointed the Lord with perfume and wiped his feet with her hair. Remember I told you one of our former popes back in the 5th century took this Mary and said, it's really Mary Magdalene. But the scriptures don't say that. Okay. Her brother Lazarus was ill. So the sisters sent a message to Jesus. This illness does not lead to, and he said, this illness does not lead to death, rather it is for God's glory, so that the Son of Man may be glorified through it. Accordingly, though Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus, after hearing that Lazarus was ill, he stayed 2 days longer in the place where he was. What does that say to you? Lazarus, whom he loved, and he didn't hop on a camel and get there immediately. First of all, this is a family with whom Jesus is quite connected, and their home was often a stopping point for him, Bethany. And how important it is not only for them back then, but for us to have extended family, homes where we can go, especially those of us like priests and sisters and so forth, to have places where we can go and be accepted for who we are. It's a wonderful gift. And it's important, especially when we're in trouble, to have an extended family. In the Gospel from Luke, we hear another story of the family. If you remember, in that gospel, Jesus is there for dinner, and I'm sure his disciples are with him. And Martha is working so hard to get everything ready. Mary is sitting and reflecting and thinking. And Martha says to Jesus, could you ask her to give me some help? So it seems in this family, Martha is the head of the family. Extended families were common in Jesus' culture, and hospitality was an essential part of that culture. So the conclusion you can reach from just these first 6 verses is that he was close to this family in Bethany, and perhaps his home was a haven. And Jesus is open to a woman as a student sitting at his feet and accepting his word. And Martha is like most of us who overdo when we're having company or we really want a little more help. Now, it's interesting, the sisters send a message to Jesus and say, the one you love is ill. That's significant. Why do you think that is a significant statement? The one you love is ill. Yeah.
Hold it.
Yeah.
Why didn't they say the one you love, not instead of the one who loves you? Why did they say that way?
I don't know. The one you love. Maybe they have seen Jesus interact with Lazarus. Jesus certainly knew they loved him because of their hospitality, but I don't know the answer to that, but it's an interesting one, isn't it? They don't indicate this illness is terminal. The one you love is ill. So we might say, well, why did he stay 2 days longer? Why didn't he just get up and go? Did he want to prove a point? Did he think the death was not imminent? It's interesting. Yes, Sue.
Well, it's just also, maybe he's trying to make a point, and maybe it's going to be a bigger deal if it's a couple days.
Maybe.
More people will be attracted and find out about it and change their ways, maybe.
Maybe. It seems as in the next little block that he has a reason. But from a very human standpoint, we'd get up and go. I remember when my sister was so ill, my brother-in-law called and said her heart stopped. And I think they were praying for her. And so I jumped in the car and I went right away, and they put a pacemaker in and she was ready to come home. But it's like, if he was the one you love, you might ask, well, why didn't you get going here? It's interesting. In the next verses, then after he said to the disciples, the 2 days had gone by, let us go to Judea again. In other words, let's get on the road to Bethany. The disciples said to him, Rabbi, the Jews were just now trying to stone you, and you're going there again? Now, stoning is a form of punishment that is obviously very difficult. Remember the woman caught in adultery, Stephen. Yeah. Imagine getting clobbered with a big stone. Jesus answered, are there not 12 hours in the day? Do not stumble because they see the light. Those who walk during the day do not stumble because they see the light of this world. But those who walk at night stumble because the light is not in them. I think that's a metaphor for saying people just don't understand. After saying this, he said, our friend Lazarus has fallen asleep, but I'm going there to awaken him. The disciples said to him, "Lord, if he's fallen asleep, he'll be all right." Jesus, however, had been speaking about his death, but they thought that he was referring merely to sleep. Then Jesus said to them, "Lazarus is dead. And for your sake, I'm glad I was not there, so that you may believe. But let us go to him." Thomas, who was called the Twin, said to his fellow disciples, "Let us also go that we may die with him." Really, Thomas? I mean, is that not the craziest statement? Let's go so we can die with him. This section tells us that Jesus is very aware that there are threats surrounding him, and so are his disciples. And Jesus again refers to himself as the light. The term fallen asleep, the disciples were taking literally, but very often we even use that term to mean death. Fallen asleep. I'm going to wake him. But then Jesus clearly says, he's dead. So, the question is, why do you think he waited?
Well, I'll just say.
I was waiting for you.
All right, thanks.
Thanks, Sue.
I'm not sure, but, like the man born blind, why? And the Lord said so that we could see God working through this. So I wonder if that's the same thing, but I'll talk in my own humanness, and experience. If something's happening to a friend of mine or a parishioner or whatever, I'm not putting it off for a few days. So I kind of puzzled about that.
I think that's a puzzling statement. He makes an explanation. It's coming up. So if we go to verse 17, when Jesus arrived, he found that Lazarus had already been in the tomb for 4 days. Remember now, no embalming. Now Bethany was near Jerusalem, some 2 miles away, and many of the Jews had come to Martha and Mary to console them about their brother. Mourning was, M-O-U-R-N, mourning was part of the culture. Women gathering and wailing was part of the way they expressed their support for the family. Today when a Jewish man or woman dies, they sit Shiva. And the families come, people come and share a meal and share their remembrances. It's a beautiful custom. When Martha heard that Jesus was coming, she went and met him while Mary stayed at home. You see, there are different ways this text says that people deal with grief. Martha was on her feet, just like she was getting the dinner ready and going right away to see Jesus. Mary remained at home. And that's why sometimes when things happen in our families, deaths happen, we don't quite understand how everybody responds so differently, because we all have different ways of dealing with grief. One of our stars, Sister Mary Sullivan, died last week. She was a little ahead of me in school. She's forgotten more than I know. So bright, got her PhD in literature at Notre Dame. And Mother Bride, who was about this high, knew Mary was special. So she got her to Notre Dame. She was the head of our little junior college for a while. She then became the dean at RIT's School of General Ed and is the international expert on Catherine Macaulay. Edited her letters, everything. And she died. and everybody's calling from Australia, New Zealand, and all over the place. I didn't realize how that affected me until Thursday when I did the communion service for the sisters. I just couldn't get into it. So each of us deals with mourning in a different way. When my mother died, I was 26. I just kept going to work. We all deal with it differently, and I think that's a very important lesson. Martha said to Jesus, "If you had been here, my brother would not have died. But even now I know that God will give you whatever you ask of him." Jesus said, "Your brother will rise again." Martha said to him, "I know he will rise again in the resurrection on the last day." And Jesus said to her, "I am the resurrection and the life. Those who believe in me, even though they die, will live, and everyone who lives and believes in me will never die. Do you believe this?" She said, "Yes, Lord. I believe you are the Messiah, the Son of God, who's coming into the world." Martha reminds Jesus, if you had been here, he wouldn't have died. And I thought to myself, gosh, that must have stung Jesus to hear that. In a sense, she's saying, you're failing in our friendship. But note his statement here. I am the resurrection. And you'll see the numbers of I am statements in John increasing. I'm the bread of life. I'm the Messiah. I'm the resurrection. I'm the way, the truth, and the life. All present tense. And then Martha, and I think this is sometimes ignored, makes a statement of faith. I know you're the Messiah. And we rarely give her any credit for that. I know you're the Messiah, the Son of God. This says to me that John's community, as we've said before, were already believers and aware of who he was. Any question?
Maybe, if I'm following this correctly, he waited 2 days before.
He did.
But Lazarus had already been dead for 4 days by the time he got there. So it doesn't seem to me that he would have been able to get there before he died, even if he left immediately.
Well, now I never thought of that. Thank you, Judge. I never thought of that. Yeah. Even if he had gone right away. There is a statement.
And maybe he was aware of that it was such a long journey.
Yeah.
That, yeah.
Pardon me, honey?
Right.
He knew everything, yeah. So we're told. That is interesting. He does say at some point here, let's go, and the disciples said, let's go, and he says, not right now, I'm waiting to show God's glory. So that's how I think John's community interpreted the wait. But still, that's an interesting point. If he had been dead 4 days, and it took 2, he waited 2. That's interesting. But it didn't satisfy the 2 sisters. Okay. Then.
Barbara?
Oh, yes.
So we should remember that they didn't have text messaging, so news didn't travel instantly.
Yeah, and travel was difficult.
So it takes time for word to get
Yeah.
to where Jesus was.
Yeah.
I personally tend to not take those numbers at all literally. I just think a few days, it took a little time.
Yeah.
But that's because I really avoid uber literal interpretations of
Interpretation,
these words.
yeah. Thank you, Bob. All right. Let's see. If you had been here, my brother would not have died, and I do believe you're the Messiah. When she had said this, she went back and called her sister Mary and told her privately. The teacher is here and calling for you." And when she heard it, Mary got up quickly and went to him. Now Jesus did not yet come to the village. He was still in a place where Martha had met him outside the village. The Jews who were with her in the house, consoling her, saw Mary get up and quickly go out. They followed her quickly because they thought she was going to the tomb to weep. When Mary came where Jesus was and saw him, she knelt at his feet and said, "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died." When Jesus saw her weeping, and the Jews who came with her weeping, he was greatly disturbed in spirit and deeply moved. And he said, "Where have you laid him?" They said to him, "Lord, come and see." And Jesus began to weep. So the Jews said, "See how he loved him." But some said, "Could he not have opened the eye? He opened the eyes of the blind man. Could he not have kept this man from dying?" The emotion showed here is powerful. Mary says the same thing her sister said, and then some of the crowd begin to say, "Well, look what you did for the blind guy. Why didn't, come on here." So they reach the grave. Jesus then, greatly disturbed, came to the tomb. It was a cave, and a stone was lying against it. Jesus said, "Take away the stone." Martha and the sister of the dead man said to him, "Lord, already there is a stench because he's been dead 4 days." Jesus said to her, "Did I not tell you that if you believed, you would see the glory of God?" That might be the hint of why he waited. So they took the stone away, and Jesus looked upward and said, "Father, I thank you for having heard me. I knew that you always hear me, but I have said this for the sake of the crowd, that they may believe you sent me." When he said this, he cried out in a loud voice, "Lazarus, come out." And the dead man came out, his hands and feet bound with strips of cloth, and his face wrapped in a cloth. Jesus said to them, "Unbind him and let him go." What does that say to you? Buried 4 days, Lazarus come out, unbind him, no embalming. This is a pivotal point in his ministry. Pivotal. Because what you're going to hear in the next few verses is that when the word got out that Lazarus was brought back to life, people in authority got exceptionally nervous. This, I think, was a turning point for the high priest and religious leaders. And we hear in a couple of verses later that the high priest says to the other priests, "It is better for one man to die for the nation than that the nation die." Yep.
Thanks, Bob. Do we know what number miracle this was?
I say what?
Do we know what number approximately this one was?
I don't. I'd have to go
We
back.
have Cana. We have-
Cana, and we had the blind man.
Right. But it's like a progression.
It's
is
a
how
yeah.
I look at it.
Yeah, and basically what scholars are saying, the progression is that John is saying to the people reading this text in 90 AD, that Jesus is slowly educating us and his listeners what his ministry is going to be about.
He's bringing us along.
He's bringing us along, and John is bringing us along through his writing, or let us say, bringing his first century community along. But the important thing that I think we forget is that this resurrection of Lazarus was the event that caused the religious leaders to choose the killing of Jesus.
Why?
Well, if you have someone who is so popular that people will come and listen, that he'll heal a blind man, that he'll produce wine out of water, that he gets somebody to get up from their little mat and walk, all these stories accumulate, and finally the frosting is put on the cake. Death is not the final answer in Jesus' view. Well, how do the high priests and religious leaders deal with that one? It's like having Superman move into your church. How do they? And they deal with it by using Rome as the foil. And I'm saying they were out to kill Jesus, not maybe the average man and woman, but the powerful. What did the district attorney in New York City get the other day in the mail?
White powder.
White powder, a threat. Power corrupts. Absolute power corrupts absolutely. And it's there throughout history. We got to get rid of this guy. And they rationalize by saying, what do you want to do? Save one life or save the nation? What are you thinking, Rob?
I'm thinking, what are they doing? What are they doing to help people?
Yeah.
You know, what are they doing to heal, bring hope to their community, the people that are in their circle? Nothing. And they're being threatened. It's like, hello,
Well,
you're so wonderful. What the heck are you doing?
yep. So I think that probably some were doing a lot. I won't want to put them all in one box.
Right.
But power does things to people, and we're seeing it in our nation right now. Go ahead, Bob.
I think it's very easy for us to be critical of the religious leaders.
Not
Another way to
us.
look at it is that they were living in their privilege. And from their perspective, they believed that they were saving the nation.
Yeah.
It doesn't make it real. But the problem with privilege is that if you don't hear other ideas and you don't consider them and use that as a reality check on your privilege becomes the most important thing, and your perspective is the only perspective.
And then when you believe your privilege comes from God, then you're in deep doo-doo.
So, Rob, I'm not disagreeing with you. I'm just saying that there's another lesson there for each of us who has a degree of privilege.
Privilege, yeah.
To know that it's important to be open to other ideas that challenge our privilege, and to say, is there truth in that we should pay attention to?
Yeah. I read something in the morning paper, or somewhere, I read it somewhere, that some parents are concerned that the art class shows the picture of David naked. Really? That work of art? That is like the book burning of the Nazis. But I think it's important, what we will begin to celebrate this coming week. It's not Holy Week yet, is it? The week?
Next Sunday, week from tomorrow.
Yeah. What we begin to celebrate is how that fear of this man overtakes some people in power. Yeah. But there's a lesson there, because we're seeing it unfold daily in our nation. So, the other bookend. We've already begun to look at you've already begun to do it, Rob and Bob. How does this play out today? And we've discussed what power and how people cling to power and what they'll do to keep power. It's like members of Congress going to federal prison to see people who were arrested because of January 6th. And they're going to try to say, well, they're not being cared for and they were innocent and so forth. Why do you do stuff like that? Only to destroy someone else or to claim power. No? You agree? Oh, good. Come back next week. I was thinking the mourning issue that arises in this text, how Martha and Mary, in their approach, how the culture impacted how people mourned. And then I thought of the mourning that is taking place in the Ukraine and Russia because of what's going on because of power. The New York Times the other day did a photographic expose of the deaths in the Ukraine. It's hard to look at, but people who've lost everything, and that's all because of a search for power. Families, soldiers. And then I thought today that this text impacts all of us. We've all lost a dear member of our family. And how we respond to that. Every one of us can name someone and how people helped us through that. How else does this message become relevant for us today? I've got answers here. My cheat sheet, yes. When the leader said, it is better for one to die than for the nation, what about someone who says it's better for 6 million to die to save our particular view of who is superior? This is playing out in our history. Unbind him. How is that relevant for us today? Unbind him and let him go. What binds us? And we wish with all our hearts we could get rid of it. I think racism binds us. I think guns blind us. I think violence blinds us. Youngsters stealing cars and backing into liquor stores so that they can take the cash.
Savoya Bakery.
Savoya Bakery.
Hello.
In the daylight,
I know.
In the daylight besides. Yeah. We are bound in many ways by our prejudice, by our addictions, by mental disease, by depression. And I think the message Jesus gave to the folks that moved the stone, unbind him, is what he's asking of us today. What is it binding me? I got a list. What's binding our church? We've got a list. What is binding Congress? We've got a big list. And we're being asked to help unbind ourselves and one another and be free. It's not easy. It's not easy. The other thing I think we can gain, I better watch what I'm doing here. Okay. The other thing we can gain from this reading is, what are our personal moments of resurrection? Every time Rob invites me here, it's a moment of resurrection for me. to use what I've been given. Every time. What are the moments of resurrection that we have experienced or we can see? I know you know some, Pam. You know some moments of resurrection. Why not? Did you get in trouble? Oh, no. Oh, God. Join the community. Listen, I'm right with you. I don't mean to make you
No,
say
that's
something
okay
personal.
because there's a million things.
Oh, me too.
But grinding in my mind is all of that I've listened to this morning, things that come to me when I first began to discover that the Scripture was alive in our lives. I was not a kid. And I remember hearing the story of Martha and Mary, and I always heard Mary has chosen the better part.
Yeah.
She's sitting at Jesus' feet. But who is it in John's Gospel that knows the answers?
There you go.
I know you're the resurrection and the life.
Don't bother me with that. Just get busy and do it, right?
Yeah, that's what's playing
I
in
think
my
that's
head.
wonderful because, in my lifestyle, we were always coupled with Mary sitting at Jesus' feet. And therefore, our way of life was superior. Yep.
Holy cards.
Holy cards. We have wings implanted at profession, But I think that's a fascinating insight. I never thought of that. I thought, wasn't it wonderful a woman came out and said this? It's sort of like the Samaritan woman. I know the Messiah is coming. And then Mary said, I know resurrection is coming. What a statement of belief in the first century. But she was cleaning the kitchen.
You're describing my grandmother who had the strongest faith ever, and she was always in the kitchen, always doing things. She never sat at Jesus' feet.
Yeah. She never sat at Jesus' feet. You get cramped doing that anyway. What? Well, she did. Remember, Mary did wash. That's a job. I think this text says to us, how can you and I unbind people? And Rob has that directly as a pastor, hearing our concerns and so forth. That's a wonderful gift. But moments of resurrection, I wrote down what some of them might be. When we get a second chance. When we get a second chance at something. When we find a new relationship that we can grow and be an equal. When we find something of new life. Liz, to sit on the bench is not easy. But it could be, in many ways, a resurrection because you can make a definite difference in someone's life, that they might turn around because of your decision. It is a ministry. We don't call it that per se. But moments of resurrection come when someone says something to you or does something for you or you help someone. That is the rising of Lazarus again and again. What do you say, John? Do you agree? I got to get these people talking here. If I could get the audience to talk, we'd be here for 3 weeks. That's all. I shouldn't put you on the spot. Okay.
And then I really won't say anything else.
Oh,
because I've been
please.
chastised, but that's okay.
Did I say
no? There's a commercial playing on TV right now, and it's Jesus. Has anybody seen that?
No.
It's like a gets us? Yes. It just takes my breath away every time. He says something like, I am the resurrection, and I just want to take that home with me and play it over and over and over again. You know, it's a Middle Eastern looking man, you know, in flowing robes. And, you know, this is embarrassing, but I couldn't even tell you what the product is. I hope I know what it is, but it just blows me away. So watch for it.
Okay. What does Jesus say?
I think he says, help me. He says something, I am the resurrection, I think is one of the things he says. And then does he say something else? Anybody else seen this commercial?
I have. Well, we
See,
gotta look for
it just comes to my house because I need the message more than you do.
It just comes to your, but there's an example on, I don't want to say a small scale in a negative way, but a daily scale where we experience resurrection. My neighbor knocks on the door and says, sis, I'm going to Wegmans, what can I get you? That's a moment of resurrection. It's giving me some new life. Or when I came home from the hospital, we'll do this for you. Those are moments of resurrection that people do for one another, and they unbind you and free you. I went to dinner the other night with Tony Sciolino and his wife, Gloria. He was on city council with my sister. And Wayne Perlow, whose sister runs Perlow's restaurant, and Father Bob Worth. Now, there's a crew. That's a crew. And, of course, we went to Perlow's. It was good. And Wayne, sitting there, says to the gang, I had Sister Barbara in the 8th grade at Franklin High School. I was 12 and she was 24. Now, you got to know what that does. Well, first of all, it makes you feel very old. But secondly, that someone would be kind enough to say that and take you out to dinner because you knew somebody, well, he's way in his 70s now. I'm only 32, so it was really a twist.
It
but
goes back.
Those are the things I think we're called to do on a daily basis. Unbind and recognize the moments of resurrection. And that's encouraging. Any comment, suggestion, thought? Are you sure? Okay. Bob?
Here, Bob.
Thinking about your lovely examples of resurrection moments and thinking about the major threat that Jesus became to the religious authorities. Fundamentally, all of us will die. Fundamentally, all of us make mistakes, right? Those are like two of the things that every human being has in common. So the fact that we have and need moments of resurrection and rebirth and so on, that's a fundamentally human experience that we all share. And then when Jesus takes the most powerful, scary, fundamental human experience, death, and shows that he actually has power over that, that created the biggest threat that anyone in power could imagine.
That's right. That's right. I'm reading John Meacham's book on Lincoln, and he's at the point, thanks to my son there, he's at the point of issuing the Emancipation Proclamation. And you have to know, even though it didn't work in every situation, you have to know what that must have meant to the black members of our community when they heard that the president had freed them. There's a moment of resurrection, big one, but we can do it on a daily basis. That, I think, this is the last sign before Jesus really gets into deep trouble. And it was the sign over which people couldn't move. The leadership, many Jews already were on board We have to remember that. But the leadership was really threatened. And we can say, maybe they had good reason because they firmly believed that they were the chosen people. And now someone is saying, well, yes, but there are others. Hard for us. So that's my other bookend that this lesson gives us. Anybody want to add anything? Oh, don't say that. That's it. Can I say one thing?
So your hands are cold.
I know my heart's warm, though. Yeah.
So, but you know, Jesus was afraid of dying himself. Remember in Gethsemane
Yep.
when he says, Lord, let this, not my will, but yours be
Take this
done.
away from me.
Yeah.
Yes,
And that kind of shivers me timbers, thinking he was afraid of dying, and yet he knew what lay out there for him, or there, or wherever it is. I think that's amazing.
It is. He reminds me in some ways of Martin Luther King Jr. Of course, one was very human and one, but King said, I've been to the mountaintop and I have seen the other side. But he also said, I'm not changing the way I'm moving. I believe it so intensely, I'm going to follow through no matter what. And I think that's what Jesus did. I so believe my call and that God's message brings us resurrection and life that I can't turn back, even to save myself. I'm not sure I could do it, but it's powerful. So we have one more week, and I think we're going to take a look at Palm Sunday just before it happens. Is there anything else I should be doing or could do besides go home? Pray for me, too. Oh.
No, you're terrific.
Oh, no, I paid you to say that. I send him a check every month. Says Sisters of Mercy stipend.
No, we look forward to
Oh,
next week.
it's a treat for me, really. Isn't it nice?
I wish you'd do it year-round.
You do.
I know it's a lot.
But, I can't tell you how delightful it is to put the blog together. It's, and to put it together, I'm not saying it isn't work, it is, but I love doing it.
Like, between next Saturday, we won't have this again until
Well,
Christmas time.
yeah,
right?
something like this, but you could read the blog and it has,
I know, it's not the same as
it's
having
not
you
the
here
same
in
as in person, yeah.
Maybe you could
Yeah.
do a podcast.
Well, that's
like
what
that.
Jeff is listening. Jeff and I are going to get together to look at that. And we have
Could we come to the podcast?
I could come to your house with the podcast. We'll do it all at your house. Yeah. In person is fun, though. Yeah.
It is.
Yeah. Oh, my gosh. Well, thank you. This is the best treat, I'll tell you.
Till next week.
Until next week.
Tell those people out there.
Hi, folks. Thank you so much for watching. I even think some of my family have peeked in, so isn't that nice? They're checking up, because I tell them I go to church on Saturday, and I'm sure they probably wonder if I really did. I want to tell you, those I haven't told before, my blue socks have carrots on them. And that's because I have a grandnephew named Joseph who is a musician. And he used to call me more Aunt Barb because he had another Aunt Barb, my other niece. So he was more Aunt Barb. And then one time he said to me, more Aunt Barb, what color do you think my hair is? And I said, well, I think you're sort of a strawberry blonde. What about me? And he said, tinsel. So I used to say to him, sweetheart, you stick with me, you'll be wearing carrots big as diamonds. So one Christmas I got the socks loaded with orange carrots. So if you don't have a sense of humor, life is some. All right, safe home. Thanks for setting up, Bob. Appreciate it. And thank you, Jeff, and all you folks online. Be safe.